Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first ProRevenge story of the day comes from Meltdown. Tried to throw me under their proverbial bus, ran herself over. I was building an online training module at work that is intended to teach existing users how to work a new process. It has interactive elements, quizzes, segments to work through, a few sample scenarios, and so on. Now, we'd recently got a new associate director who, from what I can tell, advanced through the company by throwing other people under the bus. She gets promoted not for her own merits, but because at the end of the day, she has had less mud sticking to her than other applicants. It's uncanny to the point that there simply had to be more to it than stupid office politics. I'll get to that in a bit. So after I have the first draft of the module done, it gets sent out for the usual round of testing, and there are of course a couple things that need to be corrected. I build the module off the notes the subject matter experts leave me, and a few things inevitably get lost in translation. But this new associate director just rips it to shreds, complaining that it's completely incomprehensible, needs to go into much greater detail, asking questions about nearly every individual mouse click in the sample scenarios, and overall stating that it's impossible to follow. The thing is, this module is intended for our finance department, for people who have a background in finance and have already been trained on how to use our internal software. She is a training services associate director with a teaching background. The module isn't supposed to make sense to a former middle school social studies teacher. It's supposed to make sense to people with finance degrees. I push back and try explaining this to her in a million different ways, but she's having none of it. So I have to go back to the subject matter experts with her 20 or so pages worth of criticism. And at first, they think I'm joking. I had to forward her email before they finally believed me. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going over every nuance, including readdressing everything that was covered during the 3-week classroom training. How to set up their network drives, how to set up Outlook, including things as nuanced as if you don't know how to set up your email signature, click here. I mean, really basic stuff that has nothing to do with what the module was originally supposed to teach. But I now had to include it all because our new associate director couldn't find the on switch if you stapled her finger to it. This wastes my time, the subject matter expert's time, and time spent re-recording all the voice work. If you've done voice work in the past, you know you never get it in one take. After it's all done, I send it back out for review and approval, and the associate director simply doesn't respond. A week passes. The finance director takes an interest in why this module is almost a month overdue. I go to forward the associate director's email again, except now I can't find it. Odd, seeing as how I have a hoarding problem when it comes to email. I check with one of the subject matter experts I was working with, and he can't find it either. Turns out, none of us can find it. It's gone. So I check with a friend of mine in IT who, after a little detective work, discovers that a week ago, somebody did a compliance delete on the Exchange server. This basically is a seek and destroy for messages meeting certain criteria. In this case, a specific phrase she used in her email. I start digging through Outlook, trying to find particular emails related to this that might be used to defend my actions, and they're all gone. Inbox, sent items, deleted items, every last one of them. Any email containing that particular phrase anywhere in it. This kind of thing is normally used by admins to mass delete spam or phishing emails from all users at once. Except in this case, someone apparently deleted emails that showed evidence of her awful decisions. My friend in IT can smell a juicy story a mile away and was very interested in seeing where this went. She recovered the deleted emails, and I promptly saved them to a flash drive. For the next few days, every time I had any email with the associate director's name on it, even unrelated stuff, you never know how something might fit together, I saved a copy to the flash drive. I informed the subject matter experts to do the same, and we started building our offline evidence locker. I didn't want to blow the lid on it just yet. I wanted to see if my suspicions were correct. Maybe a lifetime of watching spy movies and cop dramas had corrupted my thinking. Maybe there was another explanation. Who knows? It could happen. I'm not God. I don't know everything. I'll play defense. So, after several weeks in total trying to appease the associate director's unquenchable thirst for irrelevant details and then getting ignored for a week, she finally publishes it and sends it to the finance director to approve so it can go live. Woo! Except the module, which was supposed to be a 30-minute online course, now contained 3 hours of content and went down several irrelevant rabbit holes that had been deemed critical supporting information. As an analogy, imagine designing a training module to teach a nurse how to enter some new CPT codes, and being told you have to teach them how to read too, because he might not know what words are. That's how much BS was rammed into this thing. And the finance director, of course, hated it, and was surprised that such a rambling mess of a module would come from me of all people. So he calls a meeting with me and the associate director on Tuesday to get some answers, and sure enough, she immediately tried to distance herself from it. She tried to paint it as if she had made a couple suggestions and I clearly went way overboard, or that I must have sent her a different version that she approved and switched them afterwards. That's not even possible. It would get thrown back into a draft status. She kept trying to talk over me as I voiced my defense, and to his credit, the finance director finally just muted her so I could speak, and boy did I. I explained everything. I shared my screen, popped in my flash drive, and opened my copies of the emails that had supposedly been deleted. Every email exchange where she complained about the material, I pushed back, and she flat out ordered me to build the module in the way I did. She abruptly left the meeting and went offline. The finance director asked me if I could send him a copy of all the relevant files, and as I did so, I told him they might not be there later, and then explained what I had learned about someone in IT using the compliance delete. He assures me he'll look into it, and the crap immediately hit the fan. The associate director never logged back on. There was a massive internal audit where people from her previous departments were asked to provide statements. Leadership tried to keep it hush-hush, but you just can't keep something that big under wraps. I don't know the specific what's and how's, but the associate director and one of the IT managers had both, quote, left the company to pursue the next stage of their careers, and we sincerely hope them the best. I don't really do the social media thing, but over the next few days, as the rumor mill did what rumor mills do, I heard their crap absolutely blew up, and it came out that the associate director and the IT manager were having an affair. Now, this all went down about a month ago, but as I write this post, I thought to check online court records. Both are now facing divorces filed by their respective spouses. So yeah, there's a void in my direct leadership, in IT's leadership, and the entire IT department is getting a shakedown by information security to determine if there were any other leaks. I spent some time reflecting on why this whole series of events happened, and my best guess is she wanted to make a grand entrance by spearheading this masterwork training module that covered every possible scenario and contained any and all information anyone could possibly want. Then, as she started to realize how wasteful, rambling, and unnecessary it was, she realized that her grand entrance would be a grand faceplant. So she tried to erase the evidence and pin all the nonsense on me to save face, but inadvertently set in motion the events that would expose her little arrangement with the IT manager, taking it up the butt in order to cover her butt, I guess. I am so glad that the OP came up with the idea to back up every email. Honestly, the associate director deleting those emails from everyone's inbox might have been enough to get her terminated, but man, she really went all out on this one. She did so much bad stuff, it's almost like she wanted to get fired. Our next story comes from Viper 30,000. Turnabout is always fair play. I'm not sure if this one belongs here, as I was not the one actually wronged. My revenge was taken for someone I had never met, and I honestly don't know if they personally got any satisfaction from it. I do know what it did to the perpetrator and that it satisfied me, so I'll let the readers decide. Like many of my tales, this one takes place in the distant past, before cell phones were common and before universal caller ID was the norm, in a time dinosaurs most likely roamed the earth. Well, the 80s at least. These things are very important to the story. Our tale takes place in a large West Coast city known for a big orange bridge and delicious sourdough bread. I was living in the city for several months, working temporary duty for my company, and was preparing for work on the day in question. As was my custom, I was getting dressed, listening to the morning radio show on a local station. This station's jocks had started doing something called the Monday Morning Wake-Up Call, where on the first day of the week, they would make a prank call on the air to a victim chosen from write-in suggestions from the listening audience. Doing this was actually very controversial in radio circles at the time. I had been a radio DJ in my hometown for a few years, and there are rules you must follow. One One of the biggest rules is that you can't make a false or deceptive radio transmission, like announcing an emergency, sending an SOS or cry to help, or other such deceptions. Doing so is a federal offense. You can lose your license and be fined, or even do jail time. It's a big no-no. The debate has long since been decided, but at the time, doing prank calls on the air was a gray area. There were people who were sure it constituted as a false transmission, and some stations refused to do it. The argument was still alive at the time this happened. The day happened to be a Monday, and the intended victim had been nominated by her husband. They had experienced a power failure at home earlier in the week, and the husband's suggestion was that the station call his wife, claim to be from the utility company, and tell her that the power outage was somehow their fault, and they would have to pay for it. The station staff loved the idea, and they proceeded to call the wife at her place of employment, a local bank. The victim answered and the prank began. "Hello, is this Mrs. Victim? I'm John Doe from Area Power Company. Do you remember having a power failure earlier this week? Well, it was due to a blown transformer on your block, and we've determined that the cause is a wiring fault in your house. We may have to cut off your power until you get it fixed. Also, you will be charged for the transformer. The total cost is X thousand dollars. Would you prefer we put that on your utility bill, or do you want to make other arrangements to pay?" As you might imagine, the woman was shocked, then scared. As she asked for more information, having trouble believing that they were going to have to pay thousands of dollars, she got increasingly more upset. This egged the radio staff on. The guy making the call kept increasing the pressure on her more and more, eventually telling her that her power would likely be cut off until payment was made, and that there might even be a lawsuit. After several minutes, she suddenly hung up in tears. He called her back, and when she heard his voice, she hung up again, crying even harder. This time, the guy waited a minute and then called back again. Another lady answered the phone, a coworker, and he asked to speak to Mrs. Victim. When the coworker asked his name, he replied, "This is her husband," distinctive first name. The coworker cursed at him, calling him a liar, and hung up. The radio station was filled with laughter. The jocks thought it was hilarious. They took calls from listeners who were all laughing and talking about what a great prank it was. They finally got the husband on the phone, he of the distinctive name, and he was also laughing and joking that he'd surely be sleeping on the sofa tonight. He was congratulating the radio staff on the fine job they had done terrorizing his wife. The radio hosts promised the listening audience that because the prank was so funny, they would certainly be playing the whole recorded prank again at noon, so, quote, "Be sure to be listening and call your friends." I, in my apartment, listening to this, was getting mad. I was still pretty newly married and couldn't imagine doing something like that to my wife. All I could think of while the staff and listeners on the radio were laughing was that a few miles away, a young woman was in the ladies' room crying, probably with coworkers trying to calm her down. What made it worse to my mind was that the guy who set her up for this was the one guy in the world who should have had her back, her husband. Anger turned to resolve, and resolve formed a plan. I grabbed the city phone book, remember, it's the 80s, and looked up 2 phone numbers. I called the first one. You may remember that I said I had been a radio disc jockey myself. It was a tiny dawn to dusk station, but I knew how stations worked. I knew what they liked, and more to the point, I knew what they did not like. I also had a lot of voiceover work and could sound professional as heck. The phone rang and was answered. I launched my attack. "This is George Smith." I picked a more believable name, "from the city office of the Federal Communications Commission. I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show, and I need to speak to your program director to discuss it." He's not, here right now. Let me get you someone else." I was put on hold, and after a few minutes, someone else picked up. "Hi, this is Radio Guy 2. You're from the FCC?" Yes, this is George Smith from the city office of the Federal Communications Commission. As I told your coworker, I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show, and I need to speak to your program director to discuss it." He's not in yet. He'll be here at, 9 o'clock. "Okay, well, I can start with your station manager since he will need to be in the conversation as well." "Oh, wow, he gets in at 9 too. I can have him call you?" "Very well. I will expect to hear from him at 9. I will need to speak to your station manager, your programming director, and very likely your on-air personnel from this morning. I'll also need your station logs." "Oh, yes sir. I'll make sure he calls you right away." "All right, I'll be expecting his call. Here's my number." At this point, I gave Radio Guy 2 the second number I had looked up in the phone book, the main number for the city office of the Federal Communications Commission. Radio Guy 2 stammered his thanks and promises of phone calls, and we hung up. I went back to the radio. Uh-oh, the FCC is calling. Well, they can't do anything to me. I've got a year of pre-law in college and blah blah blah. He continued his defiance for a few minutes and then went to commercial. I kept listening. They stopped talking about the prank call. They stopped taking phone calls from listeners. They stopped talking to the husband. They started playing music. A lot of music. I listened for the rest of the day. They didn't talk about it the rest of that day, and they didn't replay it at noon. In fact, for the rest of the week I listened and heard nothing about it. I was a bit surprised. I figured that they might stop talking about it for a little while, but not altogether. It wasn't until later that I realized why they were so silent. I had scared them. In my quest to get a little vengeance for that crying woman I'd never met, I scared them. But more to the point, I'd embarrassed them, and Jerk Disc Jockey had helped. Once he went live with his bravado against the call from the feds, their listeners knew they'd been called and heard the silence afterwards too. They were embarrassed because I had just done to them what they had done to her, and they didn't want to have to admit it. I've kept the rather distinctive name of the husband a secret because I have always wished that I could meet the poor woman and that name would be how I would know it was really her. I doubt she is still married to the guy, but I'd like to let her know that in that place, on that day, someone had her back. I'm not gonna lie, I was a big fan of prank calls when I was younger. Even now, I find some of the classic ones on YouTube pretty funny, like the John Cena one that was super big a few years back. But when one goes too far, it's just kinda sad. When people start crying, it's just not funny anymore. Although the lady will never know it, I'm glad someone was looking out for her, even though they probably broke the law by pretending to be a government agency. Anyway, thanks for watching today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.